Upcoming games will be missing features because of the UK's Online Safety Act, and this impacts you no matter where you are. So here's what's happening, right? We got loads of questions from our last video, people saying if you don't live in the UK, well, why should you care about this law? Why should I care? Well, the answer is very simple. The answer is that game development is a global thing, and when developers have got to choose between cutting features or limiting them in one region, some will actually just cut. And those are cuts that you will feel regardless of you being in, around, or near the UK. Here's a big update to that story that I found in today's sponsor, Ground News, which I use for researching stories. Why? Well, this stuff's complex, but with Ground, I get the facts and easily see differences in perspective. So let's take a look at this story. Wikipedia have lost their legal challenge against the Online Safety Act. Ground News is showing 33 sources with a rather revealing 40-40-20 split, where left and center outlets are covering it equally, but only 20% right-leaning sources are here. Now with Ground, we can dive deeper to see the framings, and that tells us everything. The National Pulse says court upholds online censorship law. Others soften it, just saying Safety Act regulations. And you essentially have the same loss in court, but totally different narratives. And this obviously matters to gaming. The act is already impacting how games handle user content and chat moderation. And the power of Ground is being able to have an accurate and unbiased perspective in all of this. And we can even see that with 80% high factuality ratings, the reporting in this one is solid. But when right-leaning outlets are barely covering a censorship story, that's a blind spot worth noting. And covering your blind spots is one of the best parts of Ground News. And to get Ground for yourself, go to ground.news/Bellular. You will get 40% off unlimited access with the Vantage plan. That's the best price for that plan. It's the plan that I use. And it's an absolutely amazing service, especially in these modern times. Check them out down below. Thanks to them for supporting us. Let me catch you up on things. The Online Safety Act is a long gestating piece of UK legislation, and it's designed to restrict kids' access to illegal or, quote, legal but harmful content. Basically, any online system where kids could interact with the content is impacted by this law. And from the public view, it essentially demands age verification from users, and then it restricts access to content for people who fail that verification. And the first full implementation of this kicked off in the summer. And we've talked about, say, its impact on Discord. We've covered how it killed smaller MMOs and forums because they simply cannot afford to adapt to this new law. They can't afford the compliance costs, and, well, the risks, the punishments are extremely high. Services like Steam are also taking on the risk of verification, and most recently, Nexus Mods unveiled their version of this content moderation where they're restricting access to adult tagged content unless users are verified. That's a bunch of what's happened, but now we need to talk about the knock-on effects. We need to talk about the impact because, well, some time has passed, and now everyone is getting to grips with this new legislation, and with the many impacts coming in its wake, because not every change will be visible to customers immediately, but even if that is the case, oh boy, they will be visible in the long run. To get a handle on this, I'm going to talk about an expert interview. So, Christopher Dring from the games business asked an important question. He spoke to Isabel Davies, who is a senior associate at a legal firm called Wiggins. And his question is, has the OSA, quote, made game developers think twice about adding certain features or functionality to their games? And here's her answer to that question. Yeah, because I've spoken to some already. Definitely. And she went on to say, or maybe they've sort of gone, we will do it, but we won't do it on first launch. And to that, she gave a specific example, and I'll just quote her directly. Let's get the core game monetization loop working. Let's make sure the gameplay is good. And only then invest in clan functionality or chat functionality, etc. So basically, a lot of those social features that people absolutely love in games, maybe proximity chat in your extraction shooter, those things, well, they now involve way more legal liability. And this is an example of the conversations that are being had at the production level for many development studios. You see, if they don't have to think about moderating chats, if they don't have to meet the OSA's requirements, then that saves them time, money, and effort. And throughout development, there are loads of little decisions like that, and they're decisions that an audience will basically never really see. And to get some texture on what that means, I'll go back to what Isabel said. So she says that indies are engaging with this process earnestly and early. Now you may think, okay, that's fantastic, but it's not exactly framed in the way that you would think. Basically, it's more similar to how developers put aside funds, legal funds, for GDPR compliance. OSA compliance is kind of similar now. Sure, you can go and geo-block in the UK, but it still is a new cost to your budget, and the public may never know what's been lost from a game that they enjoy. Essentially, there's a chilling effect, and chilling effects are often the most powerful aspect of any legislation. It's not that something becomes illegal, it's that businesses don't want to risk breaking the law, so they just steer clear of anything related to that law, and that's where the Online Safety Act could be having some harm to games. Any game that allows user-to-user interaction faces this question, and as you can probably imagine, that's a lot of games. They've now got to ask, if we want to sell in the UK, will we fall afoul of this law? And to ask that question, what you really need to do is talk to and pay for a lawyer to give you a legal read of the situation. And this will impact planning of development. This might mean cutting features. If you're an indie dev, this could be a lot of work, especially if you're making the type of small team, reasonably cheap to make game that, as of late, has been going absolutely viral on platforms like Steam. So for people like that, it's a shitload of work. But if you're a bigger player, well, you can probably manage, because whenever there is new regulation, very often the incumbents are the people, even though they are being regulated, they're the people best positioned to deal with that regulation, because they have a goddamn legal budget. So let's see how, for this law, it's the smallest players who get hurt the most. A little bit of context, when we first covered the OSA, we broke down how the law works, where there is actually more than just age assurance. The companies need a record of how they've considered risk and what they've done to mitigate that risk. And as Isabel Davies pointed out in that interview, most game companies already do that kind of thing. If you use a bunch of hate speech in your Overwatch lobby, you'll be banned. If you harass another user, you can be banned, even if there are no kids around. Now, that's part of the OSA. You've got to prove that you have these rules and that you enforce these rules. Which, by the way, does mean that you should probably expect rules that exist but don't really get enforced to actually be enforced now, because the enforcement will legally matter. And sure, to the big companies, having things like your end-user license agreements or PlayStation's new parental controls, those are good, those would work. And when investigating potential breaches of this law, Ofcom, the regulator involved, would look into those things, right? Whenever they're dealing with a breach. They'll ask, like, did a company take steps to mitigate risk? Can they prove that their process exists? But here's what Roblox has shown us recently. And this is where things just kind of spin out and we really get a sense of the impact. Because all it takes, guys, is a few high-profile failures. You know the internet. You've been in chat lobbies. You've seen things that if they were screenshotted and sent to anyone in like the political system who just wanted to make cheap political hay, you know, would absolutely go viral. That happens all the time, and it's very much happening right now. I'm sure you can think of a few contemporary cases. So something bad goes down in a high-profile game, then government and the public call for inquiries. And the impact of that is that having a chat function, well, that's an automatically high-risk thing to implement internally. It means that UGC is a risk to implement. That's the sort of thing a company will be talking about internally. That's the sort of thing that will change their planning. Now, I want you to think about how this all works financially. If you're an independent developer, risk is now a lot riskier. If you're EA, yeah, you've got a legal team. You've got cash to throw at solutions. Under this law, there is no functional difference between the two. And that's a worrying thing. So indies and smaller games may skip features that you care about, like UGC, like text chat, like voice chat. And that may mean the next scrappy multiplayer game from a small team that is absolutely amazing because of maybe its proximity chat interacting with its game mechanics. Well, oh dear, maybe that would look different in the future. Maybe it's missing the sorts of social features that once would have been industry standard. But what if I told you it actually goes further than that? As an example, Discord recently announced plans to allow the integration of Discord's essentially infrastructure as your in-game chat. Right? So basically, it's Discord not just being the thing that you use, but Discord as a backend, essentially as a service that game developers could use. Now, Discord have got their own verification process. And this would then mean that, oh, if you use the Discord system that is going to deal with all of this legal compliance stuff out of the box, then great, you can just use that. And it would indeed seem like a straightforward solution for indies. And it actually would be, because it offloads the responsibility to Discord. But do you know what it also does? It also entrenches Discord as the backbone of in-game communication. This would be another example of a perhaps decently well-meaning law actually just entrenching incumbents and being bad for competition. That's what happens when only the biggest players can deal with the risks of a legislation or a regulation. They can even profit from those things because, of course, if compliance is now a problem, you can sell the solution and then entrench yourself in the market. And look, I think what Discord is doing with infrastructure is, honestly, a really good strategic move for them. It makes a lot of sense, but it would mean that, well, if you're a new game developer and you feel like you need to use Discord's solution to handle your social features, well, maybe there are things that it won't support. Game mechanics it won't support. A depth of integration that could normally only exist if you made it yourself in your game that you maybe can't have if you've integrated with Discord. That sort of thing could actually change the types of games that can get made. So while the companies with a well-financed legal department can just deal with this, it's the little guy who will suffer. But there is at least one saving grace here, and that is the simple fact that it's the largest players who will be scrutinized first, and if found to be wrong, will be made an example of. Consequences then. Here's how all this stuff will work. Ofcom, who are the involved regulator, have spent years working with these big companies, and as a part of that, they have built a register of what they call Category 1, Category 2A, and Category 2B companies who operate in the UK. And basically, which category you fall into will impact how this law will apply to you. And for the most part, they are targeting social media websites. Here's the Category 1 requirement. Basically, a content recommender system and more than 50% of UK population usage, or it allows users to reshare user-generated content, and that would be more than 10% of the content. Category 2A requires a general search service that reaches more than 10% of the UK population, and Category 2B would require users to send direct messages to more than 5% of the UK population. Now, of all of these things, Category 1 is the only one that mandates user verification. So basically, if you fit that category, you're going to need to do user verification, and if you cock it up, you really will be in trouble. And the way this will work is that by the end of November, all categorized services will be notified by Ofcom, and when they are, they will learn their transparency requirements. Anyone who is subject to the Online Safety Act will need to provide transparency guidance. But these companies need additional action as well. And that's actually why Wikipedia recently lost a high court challenge. You see, they were fighting against the potential to be categorized under the highest terms. They did not want to be categorized as a Category 1. And the case ended with the judge telling Ofcom to consider Wikipedia's special circumstances. Now, Wikipedia didn't win, but that did leave the door open for further legislation, but it did avoid carving out an exemption preemptively. So it's progress, but it's not a victory. Now, under those terms, individual game developers shouldn't be subject to any of these requirements. Isabel Davies notes that most devs she talks to are already meeting their risk assessment obligations fairly well. But where it's a bit different is platform holders, though. Different story completely. That's why Steam, Xbox, and PlayStation have been making loads of changes the last while. They are trying to get ahead of this law. But there's another reason, and that reason is that it does not stop with the UK. The big multinationals covered in this story are having all of these conversations now because they are legally obligated to have them, and the UK has just been the first country with laws like this, or at least in this context. But the UK is not the only territory who's legislating, right? The EU and Australia are implementing new legal frameworks for all this stuff, and they also incorporate checks like the OSA. And sites like 4chan may contest Ofcom's ability to enforce laws internationally with, like, say, US lawsuits. But that country is not exempt either. Individual states like Texas have had age verification laws be upheld by the United States Supreme Court. And by upholding the Texas law, the Supreme Court have basically validated laws in more than a dozen other states. So this will impact loads of Americans as well. It's not directly the Online Safety Act, but they are certainly kindred bits of legislation, one could perhaps say. Now, these mostly apply to websites with adult content, in say the Texas example, but it is just a matter of legislators expanding the definition of protecting children just a little bit more. And if you were around in the 90s or the early 2000s, I'm sure you know that about violent video games, or about how, say, the dating in Mass Effect was actually going to ruin the kids or something like that. Now, on a federal level, the Kids Online Safety Act has been resurrected 3 times in 3 separate legislative sessions. That bill's vague as hell language has been criticized for giving regulators carte blanche to restrict content. So in this context, it is no wonder that companies are taking the UK as an opportunity. They are testing their systems now. The reason why is because they know what's coming, and they're probably a mix of 2 things. 1, fear. As an example, the Online Safety Act carries a maximum penalty of 10% of global revenue, which for some companies could be billions. I mean, hey Rachel, get enough of those and you might be able to fill the budget black hole once and for all. But also, it's not just companies being a little bit feared, it's also companies seeing this as an opportunity. An opportunity to become compliant and to become infrastructure, and to use this to entrench their power. And that is, I think, exactly what Discord is doing. The services that they plan to make for devs are honestly really goddamn cool. And it does seem like a really cool project. But I'm absolutely not blind to the strategic implications of what Discord's doing. So at least I know one group is benefiting from all this. VPN providers. Wow, you guys must have had a pretty amazing few months of business. That's it for me in this video, but there's a lot else to talk about and a lot going on in the games industry. If you want to learn about that, watch this video next.